became one of the top advisors in my last company. I'm one of the top advisors in the southern region of the US in my last company, and then started my own practice earlier this year. So today I'm going to be covering, a couple different financial topics for you guys, and really just kind of, bringing things from high level down to ground level about creating a foundation financially, legacy, building wealth, and a lot of top mistakes out there when it comes to really taking on this, challenge that a lot of guys, especially have to face in life. So overall, the presentation I have today is relatively short. I really wanted to just open the space up for a lot of questions. I'm gonna be talking about a lot of different things, but as I continue to dive into stuff, feel free to like drop a question in the chat, or raise your hand if you kind of want to dive into something more specific there. All right, so let me pop this up real quick, then we can get started. All right, so we're talking about building sustainable wealth. All right, so the first thing when it comes to building wealth, and this is something that I oftentimes, really run into. I work with hundreds of different people, and one of the biggest things is mindset. I believe when it comes to doing anything, like you have to first work on your mindset, because your actions, the habits that you have, the things that you read are always going to follow like the mindset that you have about this stuff. And I'm sure that you guys have heard a lot of different content on this, but it's, again, extremely important that you really first like start challenging the different beliefs that you have around money, what you're able to achieve and what you're not able to achieve, and even just like how to actually build wealth. Like oftentimes a lot of people feel like, they just need to continuously work harder to build wealth. That's oftentimes not the problem. It's really about working smarter and saying, how can you make money without always constantly trading your time for it, making your money work for you. So a really great like thing to do, or a great exercise, is to really just like think about like, what is your relationship with money? Especially if you grew up in a household where like maybe things were a little bit more scarce. You're going to have certain beliefs, and those beliefs are going to dictate how you act when you have money. Like for example, if you didn't have a lot of things growing up, you might, when you have money, want to buy a lot of expensive things. You might want to treat yourself a lot because of that scarcity that you had in the past. And again, like it's okay to do those things, but just know why you're actually going through and doing them. Like, are you doing them because you actually need this thing, or are you doing it because some, feeling of lack that you may have because of a past experience? So again, I always, talk to people about like just really working on your relationship with money and really addressing like any type of financial traumas you may have. This is again an area that not a lot of people talk about. I grew up in Section 8 housing. Like I had a lot of financial traumas, a lot of scarcity, built on my mind, and things that like, just initially, it was just hard to start investing. Now I have over a six-figure investment portfolio, but like just starting out, like it was hard to actually take the first steps, because I was like, man, like, what if this all goes down? What if I lose it all those different things. So first, by addressing your mindset, you're able to now challenge yourself, and then by educating. That's what we're going to go through a lot of today. Like when you educate yourself around these topics, you're able to empower yourself to make, better choices. And the last thing I believe when it comes to like, mindset and like really creating more wealth and abundance in your life is kind of following this principle of be, do, have. Which is really, I'd say, almost countercultural to what you'll see a lot on like Instagram and Facebook. Like oftentimes you see a lot of people having the right things, right? They're like, man, I want to have the nice car. I want to have the nice house. I want to have the ability to travel and all that stuff. And that's oftentimes very glorified. But we don't really talk about the person you have to become and what you have to do to actually have those things. I'm sure it doesn't come at anyone's surprise that in order to, have wealth, you have to have discipline. So you have to become someone that's disciplined enough to say, hey, like, I'm going to delay my gratification on some things so I can have more down the road. But if you're not focusing on actually becoming that person, like it's going to be very difficult to build wealth just initially. And then it's going to be even more difficult to actually keep it. I've met hundreds of people that have very high salaries, but they don't have a high net worth because they never became that person that can actually be more responsible and grow their money. So again, like I can't stress the importance of really focusing on your mindset and your habits. Because at the end of the day, like it doesn't matter how much you have, it matters what you really, do with it at the end of the day. So when it comes to like overall habits of the wealthy, and actually, creating a good foundation and building the habits, first thing that, wealthier investors, understand is the power of compounding growth. So, if you were to put your money into something that's going to compound at like a average 6 to 7% rate of return, say you're putting $300 away and you do that for 30 years, like you're going to have over $1 million if you're doing that every single month over that time span. Like the power of compounding growth is extremely real. So if you can really be aware of that and say, all right, like I'm going to put this money away over a certain period of time, like you can really experience a lot of growth at the back end of that. But again, that requires a discipline to actually say, hey, like I'm going to have some money that I'm spending on my normal expenses, some money that I'm spending on my um, just discretionary expenses, things you want to go out and do, and then allowing some money to actually grow and compound for you long term. And that, of course, takes a lot of delayed gratification. I believe Hafiz spoke at a last conference and he talked about the difference between building like a sand castle and like a real castle. A lot of people are focusing on how can I get rich really quick? How can I achieve this stuff and be a millionaire by age 30? Or how can I, find some way to, strike wealth in a matter of a couple years? Every single person that I've met that's been very successful always had a very long-term plan. Oftentimes in that long-term plan, they may have had quick successes and things that popped up that they weren't planning for that ultimately, created a lot of their success. But in order to really, build wealth long term, you have to have delayed gratification. Like you can't be searching for quick wins every single week or quick wins every single month. It's really about like forming a consistent plan and then doing it over a long time span. Like if you guys tune into like Alex Harmozy, he often talks about like his time span of like his goals and what he wants to accomplish is over the span of like 40, 50, 60 years, as compared to most people. They're like, hey, I want to do this in the next month or the next year. And you can see easily his success because he's had that delayed gratification and he's actually stuck to a plan for, a long period of time. And the third, biggest habit of, building wealth is really focusing on assets over liabilities. So if you don't know the difference between an asset and a liability, an asset is generally going to be something that actually increases, appreciates over time, and is a plus sign on your overall balance sheet. You could think of things like a house. You can think of things like stocks. You could think of, a business, bonds, CDs. All these different things are going to be assets, and they're actually going to be benefiting your long-term wealth building because they're going to be added onto your net worth. Oftentimes assets are going to grow in value over time, and they're going to, help you ultimately reach your goal of financial freedom. That's very different from a liability. A liability is something that just simply takes money out of your pocket, doesn't put money in your pocket. So you can think of, of course, everyone has bills. Those are going to be liabilities. The average car, can be a liability as well too. You purchase a car, it just depreciates over time. You have to continue putting money into it. The reason why this is so important is because if you focus, especially early on in like your 20s, 30s, and even early 40s, if you focus on building assets, like you will have a massive, portfolio after 20, 30 years. Like oftentimes I see people that like, again, have high salaries, but don't have a high net worth. They're really putting all of their money towards liabilities. They're going out to, all the best places to eat. They're going out on all the vacations. They're living their life, but they're not really building wealth. And there's a very big difference between being rich and being wealthy at the end of the day. So, so important to focus on like building assets. And then another thing that I want to mention here too is just diversification as well too. That's a huge component that I focus on for my clients, like making sure that you're diversifying as you're continuing to build your overall wealth building picture. Warren Buffett said it very well. Now, diversification is the cheapest form of risk management. Like if you want to really bulletproof your overall long-term strategy and make sure that you're minimizing as much risk as possible, diversifying is one of the best ways to do that. So making sure you have like risky dollars and safe dollars as well there too. So, just to demystify, just investing and saving, a lot of people that may not necessarily have a lot of investing knowledge just choose to just overall save their money, long term. If you didn't know, that doesn't work out. The reality is like you can't actually save your way to wealth. And the reason is because of inflation. Inflation is just a natural current event. It's simply just the rise of goods and services over a period of time. It averages around 3% per year. So if you think of you having $1 in your bank account, like next year, if we're looking at average inflation, it's going to be worth around 97 cents. And that, of course, continues to compound. So after 20, 30 years, like you're really not going to have much purchasing power. We can have extremely large rates of inflation. Last year was around 8.8%. To why you guys experienced so many increases in like, groceries and gas and things like that. So really fighting inflation is like a big thing that you want to be aware of as you're going on your wealth building journey. And again, this is the reason why you can't save. In addition to that, though, it's also the reason why the longer you actually wait to invest, the harder it is to actually reach your goals. Another thing that I, oftentimes will talk about with people is getting over the hump of like analysis paralysis. We're oftentimes thinking about so many different things like, oh my God, like, should I put my money here? Should I put my money there? Like, what is like the best investment to make? But like, there's thorough research on the fact that like, if you're looking at a diversified portfolio, what will actually make a bigger difference in your overall wealth long term is not your asset selection, but simply your habits over a course of time and like consistently doing something, over a long period of time, not choosing the best asset out there. And it also applies in other senses too. Like you can think of it as like, some people may trying to be going on their workout journey and trying to, improve in their health. And they're like, okay, what is the best workout to start? And they spend all this time and research trying to create the best program to start. And they end up starting 2 years after someone else. And they're maybe only doing this workout like once every week or so. That person is not going to have as good results as someone that just found a workout and did that consistently, every, 5 days a week over 10 years. Because again, the reality is like, it's not about picking the best thing out there. It's about really your habits and your consistency over time. So like, of course, you want to do your research. You want to like either, work with a professional that can help guide you to what you want to achieve, or be very clear on your goal and look at a couple of different options. But like give yourself like the best thing to do is like give yourself like a fixed date. If you're just starting out, like say like, hey, like I'm gonna, maybe look at a couple different, I'm gonna learn about different investments, ETFs, stocks, bonds, real estate. I'm gonna do some research for maybe, 2-3 months. And then I'm gonna start doing $100, $500, $1,000, whatever you should be investing based off your budget into this thing. And I'm just going to do that consistently and pick a date. That way you can actually have a defined point in time that you'll actually start doing this. Again, like I see it all the time because I work with people, youngest client, he's around 21. My oldest client's around 67. And what I can tell from my oldest clients that have been successful is like their habits over time. They like started a plan, they create a habit, and they were consistent with that over 20, 30 years. The people that I find that simply aren't successful, they just weren't consistent. Like they just stopped doing things. They started something for a couple years, life came up and they're like, man, like, oh man, had this job change, or I have these kids, so I can't invest. And they kind of, make excuses as to why they can't actually continue doing something. And the results show at the end of the day, just like any other area of life. So this right here is a what's called a risk and reward pyramid. So kind of just speaking towards, the foundation of wealth building. So when it comes to building wealth, again, just like anything else, you want to make sure you have a good foundation. If you're going to go work out and you're just started, learning squats, like you don't want to sit there and try to load the bar with a bunch of weight. You want to focus first on your form. So that way, as you continue to progress, you don't end up getting an injury that puts you out of the game for a while. Wealth building is really the same, way. Actually, a lot of what I do with my clients, which is a little counterintuitive to how most people think, but my job is to see what is the least amount of risk that someone can take to get to their goals. And the reason why we do that is because we want to lower the chances of failure, ideally. We want to make sure that, hey, this person has the highest probability of success of, reaching a net worth of 17 million and then being able to liquidate that over 30 years and still pass off 8 million to their children. So really understanding, okay, what is the least amount of risk you can take to get that ultimate goal? Is the way to go. And again, it's not super fun. It's not super sexy. And I'm not saying don't take risk. You obviously want to take risk, but if you can get to a place and not have to take that much risk, it's a lot easier to do that. So going into, the more specifics when it comes into foundational pieces around wealth building. All right, let me actually change this color. So can I might not be able to. Okay, so going into some of the more foundational aspects. So the first piece is income and asset protection there. And I'm sure you guys are like, why is that important? Well, it's really to make sure that you're not taking steps back financially as you continue to grow in your careers, as you continue to accumulate assets, as the risk grows more of you essentially losing. So like if you can kind of think of wealth building as like you taking a journey across the US. Well, if you start that journey and you're taking a road trip, you're probably going to check to see, do you have a spare tire? You're probably going to check to see, do I have a jack in the car? You're probably going to put on your seatbelt. You're probably going to take all these different precautions to make sure, hey, something that happens that's unexpected, you have the ability to not take a major loss and, end the trip. So when it comes to wealth building, where that comes into play is income and asset protection using different types of insurance. And to demystify like what insurance is, like all insurance is it's you essentially taking the risk off of yourself and putting it onto a company. So there's like many different, there's two ways to do it. Like you never want to just ignore a risk. Like you wouldn't want to just drive down the road without a seatbelt on, acting like speeding is not a risk. What you want to do is say, all right, am I going to self-insure? Which some people have the ability to do if they have enough capital, or you want to delegate that risk to another company. All of you guys have lived long enough to know that, hey, like if you don't have health insurance, the financial risk of that is going to be a lot more than, getting a policy and paying your premiums. So you want to cover the most expensive things in life to make sure you're not taking steps back. And then the biggest thing here, before I move on, is you don't want to be overinsured. There's no need for that. Like if you have $1 million property, there's no reason to get a $5 million or $10 million house or a $10 million policy on there. Because you're simply overinsured and you're just going to be paying more than you need to. But if you have that, again, $5 million property there, you don't want to get a $100,000 policy because when something happens, you're going to be SOL. So you want to make sure that you're, again, properly insuring, especially the most important things, you have in your life. The next piece of, foundational wealth building is making sure you have enough cash reserves. So there are different types of cash alternatives. And these cash alternatives are going to be just as safe as cash, but some of them have different risk profiles. Some of them also have different rates of returns. Again, you want to just like understand which will be best for what you're achieving, or work for a professional, kind of find out what is the best, alternative for you to use for any given situation. But when it comes to cash reserves, you have things like savings bonds, CDs, whole life insurance, money market accounts, and bank accounts. All of those are going to be very, very low risk. And they also are going to be relatively low reward as well too. You're not going to see, of course, the same type of growth as you would in like a small cap fund, a small cap S&P fund that you would invest in, but that's not the purpose. And like one thing to really grasp and understand is like, what is the purpose of the money that you're allocating to a certain asset? Like, are you allocating it, for a legacy? Are you allocating it just purely for growth? Are you allocating it for safe reserves? Like, one of the biggest things I see oftentimes with people that don't have things as structured, or not working for a professional, is that they just find something they like and just throw all their money there without really thinking about a rhyme or reason why. Well, again, you always want to think of the reason why, because that helps you know what actions to or not to take. So when it comes to these cash reserves, like typically it's, let's say you don't have any major expenses coming up, you ideally want to keep around 3 to 6 months in cash reserves. So let's say that your expenses are $5,000 a month. Well, if they're $5,000 a month and this is prior to retirement, you're going to want to keep around $15,000 to $30,000 of cash on hand. That's essentially your reserves or your emergency fund. So you can make sure that, one, like if you were to lose your job, you're going to be good to go for 3 to 6 months, and you're not going to be scrambling trying to figure things out. You actually have that safety reserve in place. And I believe, like, I forgot the exact statistic, but like, I know that the majority of Americans don't even have $1,000, saved up. So like, if you are just starting out, I'd say this is like the first place you want to just, make sure you have. And typically when I'm dealing with clients, like I say, hey, like, let's make sure we're getting that emergency fund in place. So again, these are very low risk, low reward financial tools out there. You want to make sure, again, you have 3 to 6 months of expenses. If you're not purchasing anything big, let's say that you were going to purchase a house and you needed another $20,000 for a down payment, and that house purchase is going to happen within the next 2 years, that can justify having more in your emergency fund. And that's like the only time that I'd be like, hey, like, yeah, it makes sense to have 50K in your savings, because you're going to make this big purchase and we don't want you going down to zero right after that purchase. So typically, if you're going to make a large purchase within the next 2 years, that is a good reason, or an okay reason, to have beyond those 3 to 6 months. But there's no reason, especially if you're working a 9 to 5, to go over 3 to 6 months. If you're a business owner and you don't have consistent income, that can justify like more than that. But again, like for most people that have a 9 to 5, 3 to 6 months is plenty. If you're a business owner, you can justify, potentially 6 months to a year. Again, just depends on your specific situation. And this is going to be pre-retirement. So once you get into retirement, I'm typically recommending for my clients at least 3 years in a cash reserve. And the reason why you want at least 3 years is, one, once you get into retirement, you're not receiving a consistent income over time. So like, and not a consistent and essentially, almost guaranteed income over time. You're going to be receiving income from your portfolio. And when you're receiving income from your portfolio, that of course is going to be subject to the risks of the market. And what we know is that on average, there's going to be at least one recession once every 10 years. Looked at 2020, 2008, early 2000s with the dot-com bust. And that recession is going to last on average for about 3 years. So the reason why I personally recommend at least 3 years in a cash reserve when you get to retirement is so that you can have enough money to sustain yourself during a recessionary period and not have to sell your investments at a major loss. So it really acts as a great buffer asset. That's what they call a great buffer asset, to buffer against like, market downturns and things like that. And of course, let me know if you guys have any questions as I'm going through this stuff. The next area, which the majority of, I'm sure the people watching this are going to be in, is really in a state of growth. So in the stage of growth, you're pretty much in the wealth accumulation phase. And there's really like kind of 4 stages of wealth. You have like accumulation, you have just like overall management where you're just managing, then you have distribution, and then you have wealth transferring. So in the growth phase, of course, after you built up your cash reserve, really all your dollars that you're not spending on your lifestyle, and I can get into budgeting and how much that should be. But like all the dollars that you're not spending on your overall lifestyle should be allocated towards assets that are growth, up and beyond your cash reserve. So that's utilizing things like blue chip stocks, real estate growth stocks, mutual funds, variable annuities. The huge purpose of the dollars that are going towards growth is really to make sure that you're, one, getting to your ultimate financial freedom number, which is going to be different for everybody. Some people may need, 1.5 million. Some people may need 6.5 million. All just depends on your lifestyle. But the purpose of these assets is simply grow your money to get to that ultimate number and to really beat inflation. Again, as I mentioned, like when it comes to overall wealth building, like I saw a lot more people that were much more highly successful sticking to a plan and getting a rate of return between 7 to 11% than the people that are out there chasing a 40, 50, 60% rate of return, on their dollars consistently. So really the whole goal there is to make sure that you're ideally beating inflation, so you're avoiding purchasing power risk. And then after growth phase, that's where you really enter into an income phase, which again, for most people that are like in their 20s and 30s, you're not going to be in the income phase for at least another, 20, 30 years or so. But that's when you're essentially like de-risking your portfolio, focusing more on bonds, securities, things like that. I get it every once in a while, but sometimes people ask me that are relatively young in their 20s and 30s, like, hey, should I be buying bonds right now? And typically my answer is no, because that is an investment. And again, like it does do better than, of course, a savings account, but it's not actually geared towards wealth accumulation. And if that person is in a phase where they're trying to accumulate their wealth, there's really, no purpose in having a bond, because that is, again, not geared towards wealth accumulation. You're going to do much better in a diversified equity portfolio overall. So income phase, that's typically when you're in retirement. Again, you're looking for like stability in your portfolio and just deriving income from that. Then the next piece here is speculation. So this is kind of the shiny object syndrome of like investments. So it's very appealing. Most people in their 20s, 30s, and even older, may get into speculation. Those are like speculative stocks, penny stocks, junk bonds. Those are like high interest bonds, collectibles, things like art, cars, options trading, future contracts, and, of course, cryptocurrency also falls in there as well too. So when it comes to speculation, like one of the biggest mistakes that I see here is that a lot of times people look at like the 0.0001% of people that have like built a lot of wealth there. And because again, they're all over social media, they're doing all these things, and they say, hey, like I'm going to model my wealth building strategy after this person. But it really doesn't, work in life that well, because again, they were like so far off the bell curve. They were like all the way to the right or all the way to the left. And like their situation is so rare because like, they essentially just got in at the right time and got out at the right time. It's not, when it comes to speculation, and the reason why I want to say, hey, like there's a difference between speculation and investing. When it comes to speculation, you're really relying on things like hopium. You're just hoping that this thing goes up. You're hoping that you put your money in and you'll come back out with, double, triple, whatever it is, pull your money at the right time. There's no real repeatable system that you can actually follow over the course of like a long term, which is really like 10, 20, 30 years. Like when it comes to speculation, you're really just like, it's more so like gambling. You're really just hoping that you end up in the right place. So there's a lot more people that have lost a lot of money in speculation than people that have made money. And that's the reality. You don't see all the people that have lost. You don't see all the people that haven't done well. You see all the people that have won. And in comparison, there's a lot more people that have built a lot of wealth through like more long-term principles over the course of time. So, when I talk about speculation with my clients, I kind of say, hey, it's like you kind of think it's like the food pyramid. It's just like candy. Like it's not bad to have a little candy. You don't want to fill your whole plate with it. And frankly, you'll do just fine without it. And if you are going to speculate, like what I recommend just with any strategy is like typically not allocating more than like 5% of your portfolio into speculation. So like if the total amount of your assets are like $100,000, allocating, no more than like $5,000 at least allows you to be exposed to that asset class, but not take on so much risk that you're losing a significant amount of money by investing there. And again, like I'm sure some people may even know others that have been successful there. I'm not saying that people haven't been successful. It more comes down to what is the probability of success. And I'm sure that everyone here wants really the highest probability of success in the long term. All right. And any questions here? Because I did go through a lot there on that piece. All right. So when it comes to like creating a legacy, one of the things or one of the financial tools that I utilize a lot with my clients when it comes to creating legacies is actually a form of life insurance called permanent life insurance. There are many different ways to actually create a legacy. Of course, like you can create a business, you can create a whole real estate portfolio and pass off assets through real estate. And then you can also use things like, financial tools that are actually geared more towards legacy planning, like life insurance. Again, it really depends on like what your overall goal is and what you want, whether for your children, your community, when you're actually creating a legacy plan and thinking about the assets you want to accumulate to accomplish that goal. But typically the reason why, a lot of my clients will favor things like life insurance is usually just because of the ease of it. You don't have to worry about like management fees. You don't have to worry about like going in and making sure a property has tenants. And cash is obviously extremely flexible to use. If you just have liquid cash, you can really do whatever you ideally want it with it at the end of the day. And because of the tax preferences as well, too, like, whole life insurance is always going to be income tax free. So it can be a very great, efficient and flexible asset to utilize. If you guys have a great book is actually, What Would the Rockefellers Do? They talk a lot about legacy. They talk a lot about, what is the best ways to kind of structure different types of assets so it can actually pass through, various generations. But again, whole life insurance can be a great tool to create sustainable wealth. Has a lot of guarantees in there. It's essentially contractually backed assets. So that way, like the company is taking on most of the risk. So you don't have to worry about, hey, if things go wrong, because again, that contract would have contractual guarantees. If you guys don't know how whole life insurance works, I have some videos like on my Instagram that kind of talk a little bit about it, but it works very similar to like how a house works. It's an asset that you actually own, and it actually will build cash value over time, very similar to equity in a house. And you can use that cash value as a living benefit. It also is going to have a death benefit tied to it that's actually passed off to whoever is your beneficiary, whether that be your children or a trust. But can be a very flexible asset because it has multiple uses as well too. Another reason why a lot of my clients like it is because it's not tied to the stock market per se. So if the stock market has various losses, you're not going to face, the same losses and things like whole life insurance policy. Biggest thing when it comes to creating a legacy that I oftentimes will talk about is one, like thinking about what you really want that to look like even early on. And this is one of the most difficult things to do. And I want to digress a little bit, because when it comes to like legacy planning or even building wealth, like long term over the course of 10, 20, 30 years, like one of the reasons that people have such a hard time actually putting away enough money, forming the right habits, is because like people are just bad with long term planning. And it's not like, again, each individual person, it's just like a common thing for humans not to be good at like really looking at things at the long term. I actually was listening to a podcast and it was pretty interesting because they were talking about like, frankly, millions of years ago, we didn't have to think very long term. You weren't thinking about what life is going to look like for you in 10, 20, 30 years. Like when we were hunters and gatherers, we were just thinking about where we're going to get food and if we're going to eat today, and are we going to find a shelter for this later this evening. We were very short-term minded because we just didn't have as many complex problems that we're trying to solve today. So I say all this to say that like this, when it comes to building wealth and especially legacy as well too, it doesn't come natural. So you're fighting a lot of different like instincts just naturally that are really geared towards looking at the short term and saying, hey, what can I achieve now? What can I achieve in the next, couple days or couple weeks or couple months? It's really difficult to actually think about yourself long term. But yeah, a great exercise to do that is actually like really just visualizing again, like what your life looks like. You can even use one of those apps that kind of make yourself a little bit older. But when you're able to think about the long term and especially legacy early on, you really do much better. Another thing I always say is that, those who fail to plan to fail. Because at the end of the day, like if you're not thinking about this stuff early, you're not really going to be able to take action, long term down the road. But thinking about like who you want to pass money off to, what you want them to actually be able to achieve, what nuances you around that really allows you to start thinking about that and clarifying that overall vision for you. And then reverse engineering it and saying, hey, what do I need to do today in order to achieve that? By having that, real long-term mindset. I always say, begin with the end in mind. Like even in the beginning of your wealth building strategy, think about what you want the end of it to look like. Like if you're starting a business, one of the best things to do in your business is to think about your exit plan. Think about how you want things to look at that time, because at that point you can really make sure that you're doing the things when you're in your first couple years to make sure you're structuring yourself and planning yourself well to be in that position, long term. So really when it comes to, the overall rule book of building wealth, like a lot of people feel like it's extremely difficult again. It's not very difficult to build wealth long term. Like if you're making an average salary of 50, 60,000, you can retire as a millionaire. The reality though is that I believe it's around high 60%. I want to say like 66, 67% of Americans aren't prepared for retirement. And it's not because they're not making enough money. It's not because options aren't out there. It's usually due to a couple of different things. And the first biggest thing that I kind of alluded to at the beginning was like falling victim to the law of diminishing intent. This is something that, I've struggled with in my past. I think it's, very common. I think most people do. And the law of diminishing intent essentially says that the longer you wait to do something, the less likely you're actually going to do that thing. So if you tell yourself, hey, like I'm going to run a marathon race, or maybe you see someone running a marathon, yet one's in your town, you see it, you get super hyped up off the energy, and you're like, man, I'm going to run a marathon. And then you, instead of like signing up for one that day or that week, you wait and you're like, okay, like, let me kind of plan this out a little bit. Let me kind of see, where are the best shoes to run. Let me see what time of season I want to run it in. You're just going to keep delaying that action. And essentially, like, our brains are just going to keep coming up with more and more excuses over time as to why we can't start that thing now. And it's like, through the hundreds of people that I've come across, like, one of the biggest determinations of overall success is just the ability to take action. Because what I find is that, like, very successful people, like, have enough confidence in themselves to say, hey, like, I'm going to take action on this and not essentially know everything, but I'm going to be smart enough to figure it out as I continue to go along, and also have the humility to say, hey, like, okay, I need to change this thing to, make it work a little bit better. Biggest thing I see with unsuccessful people is just the fear that they have of taking action. They just simply don't do things because they spend a lot of time analyzing it. And, over the course of time, they've lost so many years to inaction, and they lose all of that power behind that compounding growth. And they just don't end up with the same results over time. So again, don't do something just willy-nilly without thinking about it. You obviously want to take calculated risks, but after you've, taken a necessary amount of information, something's a good idea, do it. And the other part, it's not about how much money you make, it's about, truly what you do with it. Again, like, I know people, like, my smallest client, he's making around 40,000 a year. My biggest client is making around 2.4 million a year. And I've come across people in all different ranges, and I can say that, like, the habits really make the man. Like, it is the biggest factor. And, like, you can have terrible habits with a lot of money, and you can have a lot of good habits with a small amount of money. And the person with good habits is, at the end of the day, going to be in a more stable and secure position long term. So, usually the barrier, like, as long as you're making enough to sustain, an average lifestyle, 50, 60,000 a year. So, like, usually the barrier is not about how much money you make. It simply just comes down to your habits. And, it's very easy to go through lifestyle creep. Like, for the majority of us, we weren't making what we're making now in our careers. You were once in college, living off, bare minimum. And of course, most people don't want to continue that same type of college lifestyle. But they usually, fall too far to the other end of the spectrum and really start living on more than I ideally should. So really practicing those laws of, delayed gratification, and saying, hey, like, I'm going to, just set some money up aside and do that consistently, is the best way to, build wealth long term, and make it automatic too. Like, the least or the less you can actually, you know, put in the, like, eyesight of you having to make a decision around it, like, the less you can do that, especially when it comes to you, like, automating, like, or savings and things like that, the better. Like, I automate all of my investments. Like, I have everything set up so that way, like, every time, get paid, I essentially have money just going into my investment portfolio. I don't even have to think about it. That way you're not making a decision about it every single time, because when you add that other human factor in there, like, ultimately you're going to make a bad decision at some point. Like, you will, like, ultimate success doesn't come down to, like, an extreme amount of discipline. Discipline is obviously important, but also comes down to the systems that you actually implement. And if you look at any very highly successful person, someone that's, high level CEO, someone that's running a business, they've implemented a lot of systems in their life in order to, again, take away that aspect of, having to make decisions around it. And then the next piece is, paying yourself first. Like, this is so important. Like, you should be ideally putting money into your own assets before you cover, any other things in life. A lot of people oftentimes are driving up the share price of their favorite designer while the share price of their legacy goes down. Like, it's so important to make sure that you're actually prioritizing, like, your wealth, prioritizing your legacy early on, because frankly, no one else is going to do it. Like if you are not like actually being cognizant of this stuff, like no one's going to come through and fix all this for you. So it's so important to, you know, at the back end of this, it's being clear on your goals, knowing where you want to go. But then after you set your goals, actually taking the steps to get there. And again, focusing on like paying yourself first. Like you're the most important person to pay. You should be building up your net worth, you know, planning for that future person 10, 20, 30 years down the road, because that's ultimately how you're going to get there. Like you know, again, like when it comes to wealth building, this stuff, the foundational pieces, the habits, they may not feel like, you know, very awesome and sexy, but it's really at the end of the day how it's done. And I have found that like every person that I've met that has become extremely successful again, like they've built up these habits, they've done these things. And then in the course of just like almost really more so unexpectedly, they had a big pop. Like, you know, they were on the right track, they're doing the right habits, and a company that they're running, you know, they got to a point where they could sell their company, and then that's where they built a lot of their wealth. Like it was really things that like came about as they were doing what they already needed to do. And again, like you have to become that person that's able to actually attain, manage, and preserve that wealth in the long term. So if you're not like building up these habits, like it's going to be very difficult to actually sustain your wealth once you actually come into it. Like that's the reason why most professional or like a great percentage of professional athletes, you know, movie stars, things like that, like they end up going broke after their heydays because they never actually built the habits up that they needed to sustain, manage, and, you know, transition their wealth in the long term. So again, a lot of this stuff is like very counterintuitive to, you know, what you may often be seeing a lot of times on like social media, and things like that. But like, again, if you guys, I'm sure you guys all know, but like social media is only showing the best, you know, examples of things. Like by sticking to the foundation, things that have been proven to be, you know, beneficial through hundreds of years of research over time, like you're going to really come out, you know, in a better result. So, you know, that's really the gist of like the things that I want to go through. But again, I want to open this up for questions, maybe any personal specific experiences you guys have been through, other things that can really be beneficial for you guys to like, you know, dive into. More than happy to go through that stuff.
Yeah, I'll say something. This is amazing, brother. I appreciate this so much, and definitely gonna have to connect with you because you clearly know a lot of what you're talking about. So I appreciate these gems, Kobe.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Yeah, and yeah, this stuff is like once you start to really like dive into it, it really starts to like it's just like working out. Like it starts to like really make sense. And like another big thing that I want to mention here is like it's so important to like understand what you personally need and what your personal goals are. Like oftentimes the reasons why people, you know, may hesitate on taking action or may not like really, you know, they're like, hey, like should I be doing this thing, that thing, you know, cryptocurrency, real estate. Like oftentimes, especially when I get together with someone, like I'm focusing on like their goals. Like what do you actually want to achieve? Like when do you want to reach financial freedom? Like is that age 45, 55, 65? Like do you want to have kids? Like do you want to be able to fund college for them? Like there's all these different things that are really just like personal choices that all come into what types of assets you should be investing in, you know, what type of strategy you should impose, how much you should be saving, you know, all those different things. So like a big thing, like as a professional, that, you know, this is like when I first started in this career, one of the biggest things they talk about is knowing my client or my customer and understanding, hey, like what are the personal um factors this person is facing, what job are they working, what are their goals, and it's so important to like, you know, one, understand yourself, also again work with professionals to understand you, and not necessarily listen to a lot of like uh like it's good to educate yourself and it's good to do research, but like you don't want to take advice from someone that doesn't know you at all, frankly. And like a lot of times people are like, man, like I heard this on a podcast or I heard this on a YouTube video. Should I do this? I'm like, well, that person like may have been or talking about something that could be beneficial, but they may not understand that, hey, you have like, a kid at home and you have to purchase a house in the next year. They may not understand those specifics of your situation. So like they may be saying something that may be good, but just may not be good for you. So one of the like, it's just like anything else. Like if you're starting your workout journey, like you want to understand, hey, are you training to be a power lifter or a marathon runner? Because benching and squatting a bunch of weight may be good for a power lifter, but if you're trying to run a marathon, there's no reason you should be doing that. So really coming down to, hey, understanding like what your specific goals are is another important thing. And I said that I was going to mention like savings. So typically like a lot of times I'll be asked like, hey, like how much should I be saving? Well, again, I'm going to preface this and say, hey, like it's based on your personal goals. Cause like if you want to retire at age 45 as opposed to 65, you got to be prepared to save a lot more. But as like a general rule, if someone's in their early 20s and they want to retire by age 65, 67, a good general approach to take is a 20-60-20 approach. So if a 20-60-20 approach, you're typically going to be spending, well, not typically, you're going to be spending 60% of your money. That's going to be on fixed expenses. Those are all your necessities. Usually just your house should be around 30%. So like if you're going to go purchase a house or, look for an apartment, it's actually really good to aim to make sure that with everything included, utilities, taxes, all that stuff, that you're not going over 30% of your take home income. So if you're making $10,000 a month, all of your housing stuff, you don't want to go over $3,000 a month unless you're willing to sacrifice in another category like your, discretionary expenses, things like that. So 60% goes towards your fixed expenses. 20% should be allocated towards you going out, living your best life. And then 20% should be put towards the future, ideally. Again, depending on like what your specific goals are, those percentages may change. But if you just kind of want like more so of a basic idea to follow, a 20-60-20 approach, works pretty well. Just moving forward there. So any like specific other specific questions, and thank you again for sharing, brother. I really appreciate that feedback. Any like specific questions or experiences you guys kind of like want to walk through and go and maybe gain some insight on?
Yeah, I'll ask another question. But yeah, no, man, you're killing it. I appreciate you. Probably more at a personal level, right? How like do you have any apps you would recommend? Because I know even for personal finance, I think it's good for people to, have that that repertoire of apps on their phone or like whatever. I don't know. Like what kind of do you use any kind of personal finance apps at all?
Yeah, absolutely. And great question. So one that I personally use and I recommend to all my clients is Rocket Money. I absolutely love that app. So Rocket Money, like it was formerly Truebill, and they have like a free version, but they also have a paid version. I would do the paid version because you can actually pick between how much you pay. Like it's pretty cool. You pick between paying like $3 a month up to like $14. It's kind of wild how they do it. But that's a great app. It will help you track your budget and your cash flow. So you can see like over every single month, how much you're have coming in, how much you're spending. You can also link your accounts on there and it'll track your assets and your liabilities. So you can see like pretty much all the, you can see your net worth and you can see what it's composed of. You can also cancel subscriptions within the app as well too. So if you have like a recurring bill, I know this is, typically like most people usually have subscriptions either forgot about over time. So you can actually cancel subscriptions in there. And it's really great from a like just a user experience. I've been using it for the last couple of years and I love it. Like it allows me to track all my stuff. Like, and I look at that more than I look at any of my other apps. So I definitely highly recommend that. Yeah, Rocket Money. Yeah, that's probably the top one that I use. Trying to let me see if I utilize any other ones. All my other apps are just typically like obviously like bank accounts and different things like that. But I'd say like the one interface that I really use, yeah, definitely Rocket Money. Another great couple things I can mention here as well too. If you are looking for like a high interest savings account, like say you have like a savings account, hopefully it's not at Wells Fargo. I, you know, just saying, no shame, but there's better banks out there. But if you're looking for like a high interest savings account, which is what I recommend for like your cash reserve, like your 3 to 6 months of expenses, or like saving up for anything big. Ally Bank and Marcus by Goldman Sachs are two great online savings accounts. I use both of them. Their rates are really great. And if you're wondering about the differences between that and like a regular bank, typically online savings, you're not going to get like the same suite of services. You may not be able to like take out loans and things like that. And you're not going to have like a brick and mortar to go to. But for the lack of services and of course the expenses, that bank usually offers like a better interest rate over time with their accounts. So those are two great accounts you can utilize for your savings and things like that. Anything else? I'm more than happy to kind of dive into, any specific areas that you guys would think would be helpful.
Just
You
wanted
can
to
stole,
get your take. Oh,
no, I was just gonna say you can stole my question, but go, Thomas.
yeah, just want to get your take on target funds and index funds.
Mhm.
Um, I'm kind of deep into one of the big financial firms since I work there and everything. So
Mhm.
we don't really have a choice to go outside of them, but just want to get your experience with what funds are the best to look at and are target retirement funds the way to go and just dump things in there, or what's your take?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to like explain what those two things are. So an index fund, for anyone that may not know, but an index fund is going to be a fund that essentially follows, a market index. You can think of things like the S&P 500, the Russell 2000, the Dow Jones. These are very large indexes, and essentially they're like indexes that people typically will look at when they're determining what the market or how healthy the market is. If you watch like CNN, you'll see like those names, and then you'll see like red triangles or green triangles. So an index fund typically just follows that index very closely. Index funds are a great way to just diversify your assets. And I will typically say like, hey, like, especially if you don't know a lot about investing and you're also like, it's one, if you don't know a lot about investing, if you're two, you're short on time because most people don't want to spend hours and hours researching good investments. And you just want something that's more like a set it and forget it. Index funds are a great option. Again, you're immediately diversifying, and it has a much lower barrier of entry oftentimes than going through and buying each individual stock in that portfolio. Because of course, like even if you just want to buy, a Google or ABC stock, you may spend a couple $1,000 on just one share. You'll find an index fund that has that same company in there, and it may only be, a couple $100 share. A target date fund is going to be very similar to an index fund, meaning that's like heavily diversified, but they're typically going to be a target date based off someone's overall retirement. So for most of you guys, if you're looking at like your 401ks at work, you're going to see target date funds with like 2045, 2050, 2055, 2060, 2065, and so on. And you typically are going to have those funds, and what they're going to do is that they're going to continue to rebalance that portfolio to match your overall retirement date. So like initially in that portfolio, it's going to be very like growth oriented, going to be a lot more equities. You're trying to, get higher returns early on. And then as you get closer to that date, it's going to de-risk that portfolio so you can have more sustainability. I believe targeted funds are a great option for retirement. They're great because again, it allows you to really just like set it and forget it. Like oftentimes people get overwhelmed with like having to go through and be like, okay, like, which of these portfolios should I pick? What are my combinations? Target date funds do it all automatically for you. And typically most people are not like going through and also like rebalancing their portfolio as they continue to retirement. So I personally like recommend them. They're great options because it does all this automatically for you. So like you may not again receive, like if you're going through and you're like doing the research and you're like, hey, really being very intentional with the assets you pick, yeah, you could probably achieve a slightly higher return than a target date fund, but you also want to consider the time it takes. So like once you elect that target date fund, you really don't have to pay much attention to it. And again, it's more of like a set it and forget it method. So great option for retirement. What I typically will recommend, and this depends on age and goals, but usually picking like the farthest target date fund out there. That way your money stays in that growth period for longer. And another thing I would, consider there, it was Thomas, I think that answered the question. Another thing I would consider there, Thomas, is like when you're going to actually be utilizing the money. Like what is because a lot of people think about their accumulation phase, but they don't think about their decumulation phase. And so like if you are going to use the money in your company sponsored plan early on in your 401k in your retirement, you're going to want a target date fund that matches closer to when you're going to retire. But let's say that you also have a couple IRAs. Let's say you also have some other assets like permanent life insurance or some real estate, and you may not use that 401k until 10, 15 years after retirement. Then you're going to want a target date fund that matches when you'll actually use that money. So great options. Again, because you don't have to put the time into actually managing them. They're really easy, set it and forget it. You just want to also consider like when you're actually utilizing the money to really, optimize your strategy the best. Did I kind of cover the points you wanted me to there or anything else?
Yeah, definitely. Because I have a brokerage account with all of those target retirement, and then I also have it going into other kind of funds as well, ETF funds that that we recommend. So I'm just trying to get the most growth out of those as long as I can right now. So I might move it to a later retirement date. That's pretty good, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I got another question for you, brother.
Yeah.
How did you yourself get into finance? What sparked your interest?
Yeah, great question, man. So, as I mentioned, I started about a decade ago, and I was actually in my like late teens, early 20s, and I was on a track to go to medical school. So that was like the route I was going to go. I was going to, go become a doctor and everything. And, in the midst of like studying, I started thinking about like, hey, like, do I actually want to follow this track where I won't actually be in my career for at least another decade? And I started to realize like maybe I want to go a route that's like more entrepreneurial. Maybe I want to go a route with more freedom. And I also started to work in the medical industry and just see that like it's very institutionalized. So there's not a lot of like, in my opinion, you're often told that you can really make a huge difference in medicine, but I just didn't see that, kind of working in it. So I really started to think about other routes. Along that same time, my father unfortunately got diagnosed with cancer. And so as he started to get sicker, I really started to see the outcome of a lot of the decisions and the lack of information that he had that didn't enable him to get the best medical care, that really, kind of put us in a tough position because he was pretty much like by the IRS standards, like in poverty, really wasn't making much, didn't really have much assets. I just saw all the mistakes that unfortunately he had made. And a lot of it was due to just, again, like misinformation and miseducation. He had a great career. He was an engineer. He just didn't have the financial knowledge to really put himself in a good place. So it was kind of the culmination of like me realizing, hey, like this may not be the career for me, and also seeing the struggles that my parents went through. And that really sparked my interest in starting to just learn more about finance. I was like, hey, like this is an area I don't want to see anyone else I care about, face this stuff that my dad is facing. This scenario I'm kind of finding some interest in. So I just started off like just doing my own self research, learning about investing, learning about insurance. Really, I'm an autodidact, so just picking up various things from what I could find. And then in the midst of having a conversation with a friend and telling her about investing, she actually introduced me to her financial advisor. I hadn't heard about it. Like, I grew up in Section 8 housing. We didn't have financial advisors in my community, or, just around. So after I had a conversation with him, because I was like definitely open to it, I guess he saw my intellectual curiosity and saw that, I could relate to people. So he talked to his, at that time, district director, and I went through 5 interviews and they offered me a full-time position at my last company. So I kind of fell into it, really just based off, I saw a huge need for it and I had a huge interest in it after I started learning about it.
That's awesome, brother. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, but the biggest thing I'd say is that, overall, like, it's definitely an area that like can be a little overwhelming when you first start, because there's so many different um obviously nuances, so many different like things around finance. You have, business finance that's different than personal finance. You have, insurance, investments, you have estate planning. There's all these different areas. But the best thing, you can do is really just like, start learning, just start somewhere and start, picking up a topic, learning about like what a stock is, what an equity is, what a bond is. And one thing that I'm very adamant about with the people that I work with, and really everybody, is just education, because I believe like the more you learn, and again, you want to don't necessarily go down the route of analysis paralysis and try to learn everything before you make a decision, but make decisions, but continue to learn, because when you learn, you're really able to empower yourself more. And a lot of the stuff I talked about is really like more so foundational, like basic level. Like as you start to increase your own wealth, and you eventually start a business, you get into things like different types of tax techniques you can do to reduce your taxes. You can get into, of course, like, different strategies you can use to leverage debt to build wealth. So it becomes a lot more advanced, but, best thing you do is start somewhere and you really just start like being able to operate, a little bit better, and more efficiently.
Bet. And then what's the best way for us to connect with you?
Yeah, so the best way to connect with me, I'm on Instagram as Kofi the Creator. I'm just starting to like do more content based off like finances. I also do like a lot of personal growth stuff. So I have conversations with a friend about like book reviews that we do pretty often. So Kofi the Creator on Instagram, and then Kofi Thompson on YouTube. Kofi Thompson on LinkedIn. So I'm on LinkedIn as well too. I share a lot of like great financial articles on LinkedIn. So if you're on LinkedIn, feel free to shoot me on a connection there. Kofi Thompson on Facebook. My website is zioncapital.us. So more stuff on my website, like information about, what I do, the clients that my company serves and everything like that. And then, yeah, if you guys feel free to shoot me out an email if you just want to connect, it's ktompson@ewsnyc.com. I particularly work with like first generation wealth creators. So people that may not have been exposed to wealth, people that may not have necessarily, been in that sphere where they're learning about this stuff from their parents, and really just teaching them tools to really, one, gain more clarity as to where they want to go, but then creating an actual plan to optimize and do it more efficiently so they can save time, getting to their ultimate goals.
Thank you, brother. Sounds good.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. Anything else? I'm a wealth of knowledge in this. I'm a huge nerd about this stuff. So I'm more than happy to dive into any, specific areas you guys would gain some value from.
I don't have any questions right now, Kofi. But definitely I just added you on LinkedIn, but I'll definitely reach out to you when I can start gathering my thoughts a little bit better on this matter. But I'm making a lot of big changes in my life. I just purchased a house and starting to launch some businesses as well on the side. So I'm definitely gonna need some, Kofi magic to work into my system.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Congratulations on the new house purchase. That's a big accomplishment, man. So great job.
Oh, definitely, man. I'm same boat from you, from the projects, Section 8 housing and all that. So it's
Mm.
definitely a humbling experience. But thank you for this course, man. I gained a lot of value out of it. And between you and Yinka, you guys are definitely a lot of some good resources I need in my near future. So appreciate you, man.
Yeah, absolutely, man. More than happy to help. Like I definitely believe that for me, it's a bigger impact when I'm able to, help people out and level up because at the end of the day, like having all this knowledge and these skills and things like that doesn't really do much use unless you're sharing it. So if you guys have like questions that come up like randomly or just like little things you get into a situation and you just want like a perspective from a professional, feel free to reach out. Like I'm more than happy to like answer quick questions, get into various nuances. If it's something more in depth, of course we can talk about what it looks like to work together. But yeah, like any quick questions, like, reach out. Happy to help you guys, just reach success in a better way.
Will do, man.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, this was fun. I don't know if there's any other specific questions or the other things you guys want to like delve into here.
I gotta
Um,
ask. I gotta
yeah.
ask that suit is clean. Where'd you get that, brother?
Oh man, thank you. I appreciate that. So I live in Richmond, Virginia, and like it's wild. There's this suit shop that's like right off Broad. I don't know if you guys have been to Richmond, but it's like downtown right off Broad Street. And I was walking by there and they had a sign that said like suits $99 and up. And I was like, oh wow, like let me check that out. There might be something good in there. So I went in there and the guy was like, yeah, that sign's super old. We're not having a sale anymore. So I was like, kind of like false advertising, but I saw this and it was like $300-400. So I was like, yeah, I got it. So I forgot the name of it. If you shoot me a message, and you're ever in Richmond, I'll get you the name of the place. But yeah, I just kind of randomly came up on it at this suit store down in Richmond, Virginia.
Yeah, that mug is clean.
Appreciate you, brother. Awesome. So yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else in particular that you guys would really gain some value from here. Um, yeah, nothing else comes to mind, but let's see here. Yeah. Awesome. So if no one else has any more questions or anything in specific, I think from here, maybe good to go. We'll know about the masterclass host here, but
Yeah, I think we can wrap up here now. Yeah, I don't think anyone else have any questions. So this was fire, Kofi. Appreciate you again, man, putting this together.
yeah, absolutely. And again, like, more than happy to kind of, talk about things at a higher level, in the future as time goes on. And yeah, guys, reach out to me if you just want to, find some time to chat. I'm more than happy to connect and really, help you guys with your overall, long-term goals here.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you, Kofi, bro.
Yeah, no doubt.